The wheel caught on a jagged rock and sent the stagecoach lurching sideways. Nora Yazzie threw her arm across her mother's frail shoulders, bracing them both as the driver hollered over the horses and whipped the reins to steady the team. Dust poured in through the windows, choking and thick, coating her tongue with the taste of heat and fear. Her mother Ruth let out a soft moan, not from fright, but from the pain that twisted in her chest when the coach jolted too hard. Nora felt it, that subtle giving way in her mother's thin frame, and she pressed her lips together to keep from cursing aloud. The driver didn't stop. She didn't expect him to. They were still a mile out from Fort Stanton, New Mexico territory, and men like him weren't paid to wait on women already a burden just by boarding. Nora leaned her forehead against the glass eyes, narrowing toward the horizon, praying the town would rise over the ridgeline soon. Her fingers trembled not from exhaustion, though she was bone-deep weary, but from the weight of what they were walking into. "I don't know where this road ends, Mama," she whispered, voice nearly lost in the rattle of wooden wheels. "But I pray the man waiting is kind." Ruth didn't answer. She just reached over and folded her daughter's hand into hers. It was the same hand that once stitched fine embroidery under gaslight in a parlor in Boston. Now it was swollen, blue-veined, and cold as stone. Nora tucked the blanket higher around her mother's shoulders. Through the swirling grit, the shape of Fort Stanton finally came into view: clustered buildings, clapboard storefronts, a whitewashed chapel cross catching the sun. And there, just beyond the general store, stood a man. Wide-brimmed hat in hand boots, dusty, a sack slung over one shoulder. His posture was patient, unmoving. Waiting. Nora's chest tightened. Please let it be him. The driver cracked the whip one last time and brought the coach to a jerking halt in front of what looked like a combination hotel and saloon. Nora didn't wait for assistance. She eased the door open, stepping out into a sun so sharp it sliced through the dust like a knife. The air was thinner than she expected. Drier, too. It clung to her throat. Her boots hit the packed earth hard, sending a puff of grit into the air. She straightened, smoothed the front of her worn traveling dress, and turned to offer her mother a hand. Ruth emerged slowly, eyes squinting in the sun. She winced with each step, and Nora kept her grip steady, anchoring her to the earth. "Mama, careful now," she said gently. "We're here. We made it." Behind them, the driver tossed down their meager luggage, a battered trunk, and 2 carpet bags, then snapped the reins again, eager to get on with his route. The horses clattered off, leaving silence behind them. Nora glanced up just as the man from the general store began crossing the street. He was tall, sun-browned, and moved with the steady gait of someone who didn't hurry unless there was a fire. His eyes were unreadable beneath the brim of his hat, but he walked with purpose, the sack now abandoned on the boardwalk behind him. "Miss Yazzie?" he asked, removing his hat. Nora straightened. "Yes, Nora Yazzie." "Are you Elias Red Elk?" "I am." He nodded, once his gaze shifting to her mother. "And you must be Mrs. Yazzie. It's good to meet you both." Her mother gave a faint nod, breath shallow. "I apologize for the surprise, Mr. Red Elk." Nora wrote ahead, "But I suppose the letter didn't reach you." "No letter arrived," he said, voice calm but not cold. "But that doesn't change anything important." Nora blinked. "You mean my home has room for both," he said simply. No dramatic pause. No hesitation. Nora felt her knees nearly give. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath since Missouri. "You mean that?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. "We wouldn't be an imposition. I can work, Mr. Red Elk. I can cook, clean, and help with whatever needs doing. Mama can mend, and I'm sure you'll both be valuable additions," Elias interrupted. "But for now, let's get you settled. You look like you haven't eaten since Kansas." Behind them, the hotel keeper, a thick-set man with sweat stains darkening his collar, lurched forward. "You planning to marry him straight off, Elias?" he asked, a half-smirk tugging his mouth. "Reverend Morris ain't back from the Henderson Ranch till tomorrow." Elias's face didn't change, but something in his voice cut through the man like a switchblade. "That's a discussion for another day. Right now, they need food and rest." He turned back to Nora and Ruth. "If you'll allow me." He lifted the trunk with one hand, grabbing the carpet bags with the other. The sheer lightness of it struck him. Everything they owned in this world could fit in a trunk he carried with one arm. Nora followed him silently, her mother clinging to her side, their skirts brushing the dusty earth. Elias led them past the saloon, where a few drinkers paused mid-sip to stare. Up close, the town smelled of horse hay and tobacco. Beyond it, the land unfurled in golden ridges and red rock hills backed by mountains dusted in early snow. His wagon stood hitched in front of the livery. Elias helped Ruth into it first, lifting her gently. Nora climbed in next, settling beside her mother and tucking her dress tight against the wind. "It's about 5 miles to the ranch," Elias said, taking the reins. "The road's rough in places, but I'll steer wide of the worst of it. There's water under the seat." Nora blinked, then nodded. "Thank you. You're kinder than we had any right to hope." Elias didn't answer at first. He clucked to the horses and turned the wagon east, away from the town and toward the stretching open land. "I put that ad in the paper," he said after a mile, "because I was tired of eating alone, talking to no one but cattle. Seemed to me you needed somewhere to be. I needed someone to come home to." He didn't look at her, just kept his eyes on the road ahead. Nora stared at him a moment. Not a man of speeches, she realized, but not hard, just quiet, like the land he lived on. Her mother shifted beside her and reached for her hand again. The light in Ruth's face had changed, like a veil had been lifted, and something steady and warm had replaced the fear. Ahead, the mountains stood tall and quiet. Behind Fort Stanton disappeared into the dust. Nora turned to Elias. "We'll pull our weight. That's a promise." He finally glanced at her just once. "I believe you." The wagon crested a small rise, and in the distance the outline of a house appeared modest, sun-worn, strong. Nora's heart began to pound again. But this time not from fear. From the whisper of something she hadn't dared believe she might feel again. Hope. "He made room for us in his house, but I haven't told him the truth about why we fled Boston." The front door creaked open beneath Elias's hand, revealing a simple room touched by evening light walls of adobe and wood, the scent of ash and dry earth lingering in the air. Nora followed behind, steadying her mother's elbow, as Ruth stepped inside with careful, hesitant feet. The main room was small but clean. A large stone hearth stood at the far end, cold for now, but promising warmth. A handmade table stood under a narrow window. 2 chairs. Hooks along the wall held a single coat, a wide-brimmed hat, and a pair of leather gloves. No clutter, no softness. Just like the man who owned it. Elias set the trunk down near the door and gestured to the bedroom on the right. "That one's yours. I'll move out to the bunkhouse for the time being." Nora blinked. "No, we couldn't possibly take your... I'm not sleeping inside with strangers," he said plainly, but not unkindly. "It's no trouble. I've done it most winters. The stove out there works just fine." Ruth lowered herself into a chair by the fire. Her breathing labored. Nora glanced at her mother's pale face, then at Elias, whose shoulders were already turned, moving toward a cupboard near the hearth. "I'll make some coffee. There's stew from last night I can heat up." I can do that, Nora said quickly, stepping forward. You just arrived, he replied without turning. Sit. Rest. But Nora didn't sit. She hung her coat on a peg, rolled up her sleeves, and crossed the room with a quiet determination. I've been sitting for 4 days, Mr. Red Elk. I'd rather be useful. Elias looked at her fully then. Something softened in his expression, not a smile exactly, but the ghost of one. Suit yourself, he said. She found the kettle, drew water from a jug, and set it on the hook above the fire. The hearth was cold, so she knelt and began stacking kindling, her movements precise. Back in Boston, she had never touched a hearth. But hard times had taught her quick, and there had been colder boarding houses with less to eat and nothing to burn but newspapers. Behind her, Elias moved through the room with the ease of a man used to silence. Ruth watched him closely, her eyes following every step, every gesture, but she said nothing. The fire caught and breathed to life, casting flickering shadows across the adobe walls. Nora straightened and dusted off her skirt, then turned to find Elias holding out a tin mug. Coffee's not fancy, he said, but it's hot. She took it, surprised by the warmth that spread through her fingers. Thank you, she murmured. He didn't respond, just handed a second mug to Ruth, and then ladled stew into a cast-iron pot, setting it near the flame. It was quiet, not awkward, just still, like the kind of quiet that comes before a storm or a reckoning. Nora sipped slowly, eyes on the fire, pretending not to feel the weight of her mother's gaze. But she felt it. You didn't tell him, Ruth said softly once Elias stepped outside to bring in more wood. I couldn't. Nora's voice was low but firm. He made space for us before he even knew who we were. I couldn't start off with talk of debts and disgrace. He has a right to know. I'll tell him. Just not tonight. Let us have one night without pity. Ruth sighed and leaned back, exhaustion pulling at her features. The fire glowed warmer now, casting gold across her silver hair. Nora moved to prepare the table as Elias returned with a stack of wood, shaking off dust at the threshold. I've got blankets in the chest there, he said, nodding toward a cedar trunk near the wall. The nights get cold this high up. I'll be fine, Nora replied, laying out tin plates. We're used to worse. He paused, meeting her eyes. I don't doubt that. Dinner was eaten without ceremony. The stew was thin, but hearty beans, potatoes, and scraps of venison. Ruth ate little, but Nora finished her bowl, grateful for anything warm in her stomach. When they'd finished, Elias stood and began clearing without being asked. Nora moved to help, but he waved her off. You've done enough today. I'll take care of it. She hesitated, then nodded and turned toward her mother, who was already half asleep near the fire. I'll get her settled, she said softly. The bedroom was narrow, with a single bed pushed to one wall, a small wooden chest at its foot, and a rough wool rug covering part of the plank floor. Nora tucked her mother in gently, then returned to the fire. Elias was drying the last plate, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up his forearms, dusted with flour and ash. He moved without urgency, but without waste. Nora sat back down in her chair and stared into the flames. I wasn't sure what kind of man would answer an ad like that, she said after a moment. And now that you've met me. His tone wasn't defensive, more curious, like a man used to being misunderstood. She considered before answering. You're not what I expected. That's all. Most people expect worse. Most people forget kindness exists. The fire popped. Elias turned his face toward the hearth, and the shadows softened the lines at the corners of his mouth. You didn't tell me about your mother, he said. Not accusatory, just factual. Nora's back stiffened. I wrote. The letter must have gotten lost. Probably, He set the cup down gently. But even if it hadn't, I wouldn't have turned you away. That stopped her. She looked at him again fully, and for a moment, the silence between them pulsed like something alive. Why, she asked. Because anyone who carries their mother across the country deserves a roof over their head. She swallowed hard. We'll pull our weight, I know. He stood, then brushed his palms on his trousers and walked to the door. I'll be out in the bunkhouse, he said. If you need anything, knock loud. Coyotes out here don't flinch at whispering. Nora let out a breath, almost a laugh. Thank you, Elias. He looked at her, and something like a smile flickered. You're welcome, Nora. The door shut gently behind him. She stayed near the fire a long while after watching the flame dwindle to coals. Her hands were still wrapped around the empty mug, holding onto its warmth, as if it could keep the lies at bay. She hadn't told him everything. Not about the school scandal. Not about the debt collectors who had banged on the boarding house door. Not about the letter she forged to escape the shame. She would tell him. But first she had to become something other than a stranger in his house. Behind her, Ruth stirred in sleep, murmuring something soft in Apache. Nora closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would find work to do. Prove her place. Some burdens couldn't be spoken until your hands had built enough trust to carry them, and she'd start with a needle and thread. A woman with a needle can sew more than cloth. She can stitch her name back into the world. The early light broke through the east-facing window in a golden slant, casting shadows across the kitchen floor. Nora stood at the stove sleeves, rolled, brow damp, turning biscuits in a cast-iron pan with the kind of practiced care that made her forget how tired she was. The silence of dawn wrapped around her, heavy and expectant. Ruth was still sleeping for once. The kind of sleep only earned after a night without coughing. The fire crackled low, and the scent of flour and butter mingled with the cold morning air creeping under the door. Outside, the wind brushed against the eaves like breath. This land breathed differently, dry and wide, like everything it touched was supposed to endure. Nora set the biscuits aside and filled 2 mugs with coffee. One she set near her mother's side for when she woke. The other she took with her to the front porch. Elias was already up, crouched near the corral, hammer in hand, reinforcing a rail that had started to rot near the base. The sound of iron on wood echoed across the morning stillness. She watched him for a moment, sipping slowly. He didn't look up. She walked out barefoot, the earth cold beneath her soles, and leaned against the post. You start early. Sun waits for no man, he said, glancing over his shoulder. Or woman. She smiled faintly. You need help, he paused, hammer mid-air. You know how to fix a corral? No, she admitted. But I can learn. He looked at her fully, then the corner of his mouth twitching. I'll take help in the garden first. There's a patch needs weeding near the shed. Later today, I'll do it. Their eyes held for a beat longer than was polite. Then she turned and stepped back inside. By mid-morning, Ruth had taken her coffee and moved to the rocking chair near the hearth. She'd wrapped a shawl over her shoulders and was fiddling with the hem of her sleeve fingers, twitching like they missed something. Nora knew that look. She stepped into the smaller room they shared and pulled the carpet bag from beneath the bed. From inside, she retrieved a wrapped bundle and laid it on her mother's lap. Ruth slowly peeled back the cloth. Needles, embroidery, floss, a thimble, and a pair of silver scissors, worn but still sharp. You saved it, she murmured. Of course I did. Ruth held the thimble between her fingers like a prayer bead. I didn't think I'd ever use these again. You're going to, Nora said. That's why we're here. So you can breathe and stitch and be something again. Ruth blinked, her eyes glassy. It won't bring the shop back. Or your father. No, Nora said quietly. But it brings something back, and that's enough. A few days passed. Nora worked in the garden, cleared out the chicken coop, helped Elias sort feed. Ruth stayed inside, slowly gaining color in her cheeks. She began stitching again, first mending socks, then patching the knees of Elias's worn trousers. By the end of the week, she'd finished a new apron for Nora, a soft blue one with tiny hand-embroidered wheat stalks at the hem. You didn't have to, Nora had said when her mother held it out. I did, Ruth said. A woman who works with her hands deserves clothes that remember her. Elias returned from town on the fourth morning with a sewing machine strapped into the wagon bed. The thing was scuffed but functional. He set it down on the table like it was a gift too humble to speak of. Nora's mouth parted. Ruth stared motionless. I had the chance to trade for it, Elias said, avoiding both their eyes. Figured it might help. Ruth stood, slowly moved to it like it might vanish. She ran her fingers across the wheel, then touched the drawer. The machine smelled like oil and wood and time. I haven't touched one in 6 years, she whispered. Elias rubbed the back of his neck. Well, no time like now. Nora didn't speak, just watched as her mother slid into the chair, like someone easing into a memory. Ruth threaded the needle with surprising steadiness, lined a scrap of linen beneath the foot, and began to sew. The sound of the wheel turning filled the house steady and clean. Nora wiped at her cheek before the tear fell. That evening, Elias sat on the porch carving a new handle for the broom. Chayo Benali appeared near sundown, leading a bay mare with a limp. He nodded toward Elias, but cast a longer glance at the light glowing from inside the house. She's sewing, Elias said, catching the glance. Old machine I brought back. Chayo lowered himself beside him without a word, pulling a pipe from his coat. After a minute, he said, She yours? Elias paused his carving. Not yet. You aim to keep both Elias's jaw worked. I gave my word. That's not what I asked. I aim to keep what's good, Elias said. Chayo gave a nod. Then guard it. Town's already whispering. Clara Romero says you married her in secret. Elias snorted. Clara Romero needs a hobby. Chayo chuckled. Inside, Ruth continued sewing and Nora prepared supper. 2 days later, Clara Romero herself came knocking, her niece's shawl clutched in her hands, a scowl stitched into her brow. Word is your mother sews, she said to Nora, looking over her shoulder into the house. Fine work, they say. Ruth stepped up beside Nora, posture regal. I'll mend it. 2 days' time. Clara blinked. You charge not in coin, Ruth said. But I'll take milk. Or honey. Clara huffed but handed over the shawl. That evening, as the lamp burned low and Ruth stitched in rhythm with the night, Elias leaned against the doorframe watching them both. You'll have more coming, he said. Clara talks, but she sends the whole town running when she does. I'm ready, Ruth said, eyes not leaving her work. I hope you are too, Nora. Nora looked up from where she was rolling dough. For what to stay, he said simply. Nora met his gaze, hands stilled in flour. She didn't answer yet, but her heart thumped with a strange certainty she wasn't ready to name. Later that night, when the fire had died and Ruth had gone to bed, Nora stepped outside with her shawl wrapped tight and her thoughts tangled. The stars over Fort Stanton were clearer than any sky she'd ever known. They weren't crowded. They were spread wide like the land itself, like they expected room to breathe. Elias sat by the barn sharpening a blade. She walked to him slowly. You didn't have to get that machine, she said. I know. She's different since it arrived. I see that. Thank you. Elias didn't look up, just said, didn't do it for thanks. She watched him in silence. The steady scrape of metal on stone, the quiet pull of the wind, the sharp scent of cedar in the air. "You gave her back her hands," Nora said finally. "And I won't forget that." Elias met her eyes for a long, slow moment. "You ready for the rest of what this place, this work, these people?" She thought of her mother bent over the machine humming, of Clara swallowing her pride, of the porch bathed in quiet lamplight. She nodded. "I'm ready." And she was, though she had no idea how far readiness would be tested. Even the dust seemed to hesitate when he stepped forward. The heat that afternoon was the kind that made your skin itch even under your clothes. A red haze hung over the dirt path that led to the wide front porch of Harrison's ranch house, and above the sky stretched dull and unbroken humming with cicadas. The cattle lowed dully in the fields, distant and half asleep. Harrison stood under the porch awning shirt, damp at the collar, one hand resting on the weathered rail. But his eyes were fixed beyond the fence line. A man on horseback was coming up slow, his silhouette swaying in the heat shimmer like something conjured by the earth itself. Harrison narrowed his gaze. He didn't recognize the gait of the horse or the slouch of the rider's hat. That alone put him on edge. Out here, a stranger never arrived without a reason, and rarely a good one. Rebecca stepped out quietly behind him, her shawl drawn tight despite the heat. She looked at the man approaching, and then at Harrison, reading his tension with instinct. "That's someone you know." "No," Harrison said low. "But he knows the way here. That's enough to make me cautious." The horse came to a stop near the hitching post, and the rider swung down with a grunt. His boots hit the dirt with the lazy confidence of someone used to being welcomed, or too foolish to care if he wasn't. Harrison stepped down from the porch, Rebecca right behind him. The man looked up, pulling off his hat with a dramatic flair. His grin was too easy, too white. "Well, now you must be Harrison Blackwater," the man said, voice slick as oiled leather. "Name's Curtis Vale. Heard you'd taken in a bride and her mama." The way he said it made Rebecca's spine stiffen. Martha inside rocked slowly in her chair, humming hymns to herself, unaware of the tension knotting on the front steps. Harrison didn't offer a handshake. "What's your business?" Curtis ignored the edge in his voice. "Oh, just passing through, saw the name on the mailbox. Blackwater's a known name back near the county line." "I haven't been near the county line in 15 years, Harrison said. "Well, that's where your daddy had some debts before he passed. I'm the sort that helps collect them on behalf of interested parties." Rebecca stepped closer to Harrison. "I thought you owned this land outright," she whispered. "I do," he murmured, but his voice was tight now. Curtis caught it. "You might have worked it clean since then, but debts don't always vanish just 'cause time's passed. There's interest, generational kind." "Get off my land," Harrison said. Curtis smiled wider. "I'll be back with papers. Just thought I'd introduce myself before things get formal." He tipped his hat at Rebecca in a way that made her skin crawl, then turned mounted and rode off as easy as he came. Inside the house felt smaller than usual that night. Harrison sat with the ledger open, poring over yellowed pages by the light of the oil lamp. Rebecca stood behind him, her hand lightly on his shoulder. Neither of them said anything for a long while. "It's not your fault," she said finally. "I know it ain't. But that doesn't mean it won't cost us." He snapped the ledger shut. "I've worked this land near 20 years, paid every man who needed paying. No one's taking it from me." She could see the storm building in his chest. "I can help," she said gently. "Let me look over the documents when he returns. I've a mind for reading contracts Father made sure I did after the war." Harrison looked up at her, then something flickering in his eyes, respect maybe, or gratitude too deep to name. "You'd do that? We're not just surviving out here, Harrison. We're building something. I won't let anyone tear it down, not after all we've come through." He leaned back in the chair, the weight of the day settling heavy. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," he said. "Someone who sees the fight ahead and stays anyway." "I didn't come here to hide from hard things," Rebecca replied, her voice steady. "I came to build a life." At that, a sudden ruckus outside made them both stand. Hooves fast and urgent tore through the stillness. Harrison grabbed his rifle from the corner, motioning for Rebecca to stay back. When he stepped onto the porch, a small figure toppled from a pony dust clouding up around her. It was Clara May, panting hard, her face flushed from the ride. "They're coming," she gasped. "Curtis and 2 others. With wagons. Said they've got claim to seize property if you don't pay up." Rebecca was already helping the girl inside. Harrison's jaw worked tight and his knuckles whitened on the rifle stock. That night was long and sleepless. Harrison watched the gate from the porch firelight, casting shadows that twisted and moved like old ghosts. Inside, Rebecca packed quietly, not to run, but to be ready. If they were going to lose something, they'd lose it with dignity, not desperation. Before sunrise, Thomas Bell rode in from the South Trail, reining in hard. He was breathless, wild-eyed. "Heard from the telegraph clerk in Las Cruces," he said. "Curtis Vale's not just some debt collector. He's part of a gang legal on paper, but dirty as dishwater. Been doing this same trick to homesteaders. They show up with forged papers, rough up the place, and take what they can." Harrison nodded once. "Then we won't treat him like a man with manners. You got a plan? I do now." Rebecca joined them, arms folded tight across her bodice, a look of fire behind her calm. "We fight this with facts, and if that fails, we fight it like frontier folk always have, with grit and a little fearlessness." Thomas looked between them and smiled grimly. "I'll stay. Reckon you could use another pair of hands." As dawn broke, the wind picked up, and the dust on the road began to stir again. This time Harrison didn't flinch. He stood with both feet planted, rifle in hand, a wife at his side, and the truth burning clear behind his eyes. And when the wagon wheels rumbled in the distance, even the dust seemed to hesitate when he stepped forward. There's no paper in the world stronger than a woman's voice when she's had enough. The sound of wagon wheels cracking against the dry earth stirred the morning calm like a warning drum. Harrison stood at the gate in his worn boots, rifle cradled in one arm. Rebecca was behind him, calm and poised, dressed in her navy blue riding skirt and buttoned bodice, the silver locket she always wore, glinting in the sunlight like a seal of quiet defiance. Thomas stood off to the side, arms crossed, a steady presence. 3 men approached Curtis Vale, seated high on a freight wagon flanked by 2 brutes in dust-coated vests, their hands suspiciously near their hips. The lead wagon bore a crudely stamped sign, County Collection Services, but even a blind man could see the ink was fresh, the corners of the documents, tucked under the driver's seat, fluttering in the wind like stage props. Curtis climbed down, slow, wiping his hands on his vest, like a man preparing to shake hands at a funeral. His smile was practiced and poisonous. "Morning, Blackwater. I come in peace only to fulfill the unfortunate duties of collection. Legal, mind you." He tapped a rolled scroll of parchment like it was sacred law. "You understand. Interest accumulated. Ancestral debts. The usual." Rebecca stepped forward before Harrison could speak. Her voice, though soft, cut like frost. "You'll show us your paperwork, Mr. Vale. We'll read every word." Curtis raised his brows, amused. "Of course. I like a woman who's curious. You'll find I'm more than that." He passed the papers to her with exaggerated civility. Rebecca didn't flinch as she took them. She walked to the porch, unrolled them on the rail, and bent to read. The silence was thick, only the wind and the slow creak of Martha's rocker behind the screen door. She read once, then again. Her fingers traced the stamped seal, then stopped cold at the signature at the bottom. Her eyes narrowed. "This seal is crooked," she said, straightening. "This isn't from any county office. This signature belongs to a man who passed 6 years ago." Curtis's grin twitched. "Ma'am, I assure you—" "No," she said, lifting the papers. "You assure nothing. This is a forgery." Curtis's voice darkened. "You accusing me of lying? I'm not accusing," she said. "I'm stating. And if you take one more step toward this house, I'll see to it the U.S. Marshall hears about it. I know his sister in Santa Fe. Went to school with her." Curtis laughed, a dry sound. "You bluff well. I don't bluff. I testify." She folded the papers and held them out. "You'll want these back, unless you'd like me to walk them straight into Judge Emery's hands." Harrison stepped beside her, then silent but stone-solid rifle still at the ready. The two men on Curtis's flanks looked between them, unsure. One of them scratched the back of his neck. "You see," Rebecca continued, her voice gathering, "this home may have once stood on shaky ground, but we've braced it with truth. And you can't huff and puff a home like that down." Curtis's smile had vanished. "Be careful, ma'am. You're making this personal." "It is personal," she said. "You trespassed on a widow's hope. You rattled the rocker of a mother who buried her husband with her bare hands. You tried to shake down a man who's worked this earth until his skin cracked open. So yes, it's personal." Thomas stepped forward now, voice calm but steady. "And I'll see to it every ranch hand this side of the Pecos knows your name, Curtis Vale, that you peddle lies and steal what decent folks build." Curtis's jaw worked, something seething behind his eyes. "This ain't over." "No," Rebecca said. "It's just beginning." He yanked the papers from her hand, crumpling them in his fist. "You made an enemy today, woman." She didn't flinch. "I sleep better knowing that than I would, living quiet under a liar's shadow." Curtis turned on his heel and climbed back on the wagon. The two men followed, one glancing back uneasily. As they turned to leave, Harrison walked out and stood in the road behind them, his voice low but carried by the wind. "If you come back, it won't be words waiting." The wagon disappeared down the ridge, dust trailing behind, like a wound unraveling. Inside, the air was still. Rebecca leaned against the porch post, her hands trembling now that it was over. Harrison came to her, laying a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You didn't just hold your own," he said. "You held this whole place together." She smiled faintly. "I didn't plan to. I just knew I couldn't let him take what little peace we'd found." Martha had paused, her rocking, her eyes glistening with quiet pride. "Your father would have been proud," she whispered. That night they lit a lantern and sat around the table with real peace in the room for the first time since the wedding. Martha hummed softly in the corner. Clara May helped Rebecca braid dried lavender into small bundles to hang in the windows. The smell filled the room like a benediction. Thomas raised a glass of water and said, "To land earned, not stolen, and women who don't back down." Rebecca's cheeks colored, but she lifted her own glass. "To neighbors who stay when it's dangerous, and to men who listen." Harrison caught her gaze across the table. "To a home that holds everyone who needs it." They drank in silence, not because there was nothing left to say, but because some moments are too sacred for words. Later, as they stepped out into the night air, Harrison walked beside Rebecca, the stars stretching wide above them. The wind had shifted, no longer dry and tense, but cool, carrying the promise of something else. I didn't know you had that kind of fire in you, he said quietly. She turned to him, her smile gentle. There's a lot you don't know about me yet. He looked at her for a long moment. Then I hope you'll stay long enough to teach me. She held his gaze. I plan to. Inside, Clara May sat at the table, her chin propped on one hand, watching them through the window with a soft smile. Martha had dozed off in the rocker, peaceful for the first time in weeks. The house breathed quietly, walls no longer bracing against collapse. But miles down the ridge, Curtis Vale chewed on a cigar, his eyes cold. He hadn't ridden this far west for nothing, and he'd be damned if a woman's voice would be the end of him. In the dark, something mean stirred, and it was heading back their way. There's a storm coming, and not all storms wear clouds. The morning sky hung low, swollen with bruised light, as if the sun was thinking twice about rising. Rebecca stood at the sink, rinsing the last of the coffee cups. Her hands moved, but her mind was back on Curtis Vale's face, his bitter retreat, the promise in his eyes that this wasn't finished. The kind of man who didn't take defeat like medicine. He took it like poison. Outside, Thomas was patching the barn roof with Harrison. The hammering echoed with steady rhythm normalcy, trying to rebuild itself plank by plank. Clara May was sitting cross-legged under the apple tree, showing Martha how to twist stems into tiny hearts, her laughter soft and bright. For the first time, the ranch felt like it had a heartbeat again, but Rebecca could feel the wind curling differently. Curtis had left too easy, too quiet. By mid-afternoon, the wind picked up with sharp teeth. The air turned metallic. Dry lightning flashed far off, but no thunder followed, just a flicker in the distance like the prairie holding its breath. Thomas came in first, wiping his brow. Wind's shiftin' strange, I know, Rebecca said. Feels like it's waiting for something. She didn't speak her worry aloud. Not yet. Harrison came in next, boot heels, heavy jaw tight. He walked straight to the back window and stared out toward the road, then turned to her. Riders coming. Rebecca moved beside him. A small figure on horseback was cutting through the dusty ridge trail fast. When they came into view, Rebecca gasped. It was Sheriff Baines. The sheriff pulled hard to a stop, dust rising around him like smoke. He dismounted, eyes scanning the property, face grim. Rebecca. Harrison. I need a word. Urgent. They stepped outside, the others following. Clara May clutched Martha's hand, eyes wide. Baines didn't waste time. Curtis Vale filed a claim against this property at dawn. Said y'all assaulted him on private land. Said he's owed this ranch by writ of backdeed. He brought forged papers into town again and pressured the registrar into scheduling a hearing within the week. Harrison growled low. The same forged papers we caught him on. The very same, Baines said. But now he's greased the wheels. Brought a man from Amarillo to back his story. Says he has a deed chain that predates yours by a decade. Rebecca's mouth went dry. He's trying to bury us in lies. Baines nodded. And he's pulling in folks with deep pockets. One of the councilmen in town's already vouching for him. I'm here because you got 3 days to gather your counterproof or the land'll be locked pending court decision. You'll be evicted until it's settled. Martha let out a soft, broken sound behind them. Thomas stepped forward. There's gotta be a way. This place, my daddy signed it over proper. I watched him write the will with his own hand. Rebecca stared at Baines. Then we find that will. Baines met her eyes firm. I hope you do. But Curtis moves fast and dirty. He tipped his hat and rode off just as quick as he came. Inside, the air thickened with silence. Even the walls felt heavier. Clara May looked up at Rebecca. What's eviction mean? Rebecca bent to her level, cupping her cheek. It means someone's trying to take something that isn't theirs. But we're not going to let them. We'll lose everything, Martha said, voice small. No, Rebecca replied. Not if we fight. Thomas rubbed his temples. The original deed's gone, lost in the fire with the old ledger. Rebecca's mind churned. But what about the church records Pastor Harlan oversaw the will signing? He's old, but still alive. Harrison nodded. And if he's kept any documents, they might have his ledger book. We ride at first light, she said. The next morning, Rebecca, Harrison, and Thomas set out toward Silver Bluff, a smaller town 20 miles west, where the old preacher had retired. The road was rough sky, still heavy with heat and omen. They found Pastor Harlan at a cottage behind the church, sitting in a rocking chair on the porch. His hands gnarled, but eyes still sharp. He recognized Thomas immediately. You're Abel's boy. Yes, sir. And we need your help. They explained the situation, each word peeling away layers of calm from the old man's face. When Rebecca finished, he nodded and pushed himself up slow. I remember that day, he said. Your daddy signed over the land with a clear heart. He wanted the deed witnessed proper. Did you record it? Rebecca asked, breath caught. I did, Harlan replied. In my blue ledger. He disappeared into the back room and returned minutes later with a thick, faded book. He opened it with careful hands, turning until he landed on a page marked with a ribbon. There it was. The Blackwater name, the date, the signature, witnessed by 2 elders. Rebecca traced the ink heart thudding. Can we take this? She asked. I'll give you the original, he said. Lord knows it might save you. They rode back as fast as the horses could take them. Dust rose behind them like smoke from a cannon. That night they spread the ledger open on the kitchen table. The signature glowed under lantern light like a promise kept. But Harrison didn't smile. There's more coming. Curtis won't stop with lies. If he can't buy the law, he'll bring force. Rebecca looked out the window into the night. A distant glimmer lantern light flickering on the ridge. Not stars. Movement. There's a storm coming, she murmured, and not all storms wear clouds. They doused the lantern, every door locked, every rifle loaded, and they waited. Hearts steady, spines straight. Because this time the storm would find them ready. The wind don't lie. It warns you before a man ever knocks. The wind started rising just after midnight. Not a howl, not yet, but that low whistle that crept in through the eaves and slipped under the door like a whisper with teeth. Rebecca sat in the parlor with her shotgun across her knees, watching the flame in the lantern twitch sideways. The old ranch house groaned under the weight of silence. Harrison was stationed near the barn, a Winchester slung across his chest, eyes sharp as iron. Thomas was upstairs in the loft with Clara May and Martha, who hadn't slept a minute. He'd told them a story about stars and how they guided lost cattle home. But the girls knew this wasn't about cattle. This was about men. Outside, the cottonwoods began to sway leaves chattering like nervous women behind closed curtains. Then hooves, not galloping, not wild, just steady, calculated, like men who'd rehearsed. Rebecca stood, moved to the window. 5 riders, dark coats, no lanterns, no intention of being seen unless it served them. They stopped just past the front gate. One dismounted and walked toward the porch with a kind of swagger that smelled of rot. Curtis Vale. She met him at the front steps, gun in hand, not raised yet. The lantern on the porch cast long shadows across the wood, and the wind played with her hem like it was trying to pull her back. Curtis grinned. Didn't expect a welcome party. I don't do hospitality for thieves, Rebecca said. He looked past her shoulder at the house. I came to offer a peace. Peace don't ride in after dark with 4 armed men, she said. State your reason or ride on. Curtis held up a folded paper, waving it like a fan. Legal injunction. Tomorrow morning the marshal arrives to evict y'all. I just thought I'd save everyone the theatrics and offer you a deal tonight. Rebecca didn't blink. You forged that paper. You forged the last one too. His grin widened snake-like. Prove it in court. But by the time you do this, land'll be under my boot. You really want your girls dragged out by lawmen, or worse, you won't touch them. He stepped onto the first porch step, and Rebecca cocked the shotgun. That stopped him. Curtis's eyes narrowed. You gonna shoot me on your own front porch, in front of your kin? I've shot worse for less, she said coldly. And I won't miss. Behind her, Harrison's voice cut through the dark like a blade. Step back, Vale. Curtis turned his head just enough to see Harrison walk out of the shadows with the rifle aimed at center mass. Curtis chuckled, but it was tight now. You're making a mistake. No, Rebecca said steady. The mistake was thinking this family would bow. He backed off the steps slow. Last offer. Pack your things. Be gone by sunrise. Or the storm coming next won't just be paper and ink. Rebecca leaned forward just enough for her voice to pierce him. The wind don't lie. It warns you before a man ever knocks. Curtis's grin faltered. He turned, spat into the dirt, and climbed back onto his horse. When the riders disappeared over the ridge, Harrison walked up beside her. He's trying to rattle us. He's trying to provoke us, she said. Force our hand before the marshal gets here. She looked toward the hills, wind-kicking dust in little eddies along the fence line. They spent the rest of the night taking turns on watch. No one slept. Even the cows seemed to move quieter than usual, sensing the tension in the air. By first light, the house was packed. Not to run, but to prepare. All the legal documents, the blue ledger, every photo, every letter, even Abel Blackwater's old wedding ring tucked in a lockbox, Rebecca planned to bring straight to the courthouse. As the sun crested the ridge, Sheriff Baines rode in, followed by Marshal Redden and 2 deputies. The marshal was a tall man with a voice like granite, unreadable as a desert sky. We're here to serve an injunction, he announced. Pending court hearing in Amarillo next week. Property is to be vacated until ownership is confirmed. Rebecca stepped forward. I have proof that the claim is fraudulent. Witness signatures. Ledger from the original land transfer. Pastor Harlan will testify. Redden looked down at her, eyes narrowing. That'll be for the judge to decide. But until then, I follow the law. Thomas came down the steps holding the blue ledger with both hands like it was a sacred book. This ain't just paper. This is our blood. Redden frowned. I don't deal in metaphors, son. Only orders. Baines cleared his throat. Marshal, you ought to look at that ledger. Pastor Harlan's a trusted figure. If the deed's recorded proper with his hand, that could make your injunction moot. Redden didn't like it, but he accepted the book, flipping through pages. When he reached the entry, he whistled low. Signed by Harlan and 2 elders. If this checks out, this property can't be seized. Curtis Vale stepped from behind his men. That ledger's fake. Baines turned slow. Then you won't mind if I ride back to Silver Bluff and ask the good pastor myself. Curtis's jaw twitched. That preacher's got memory problems. He's near blind. Then it'll be a short conversation, Baines said. Either way, you'll have to wait for the hearing like everyone else. Redden shut the book, then handed it to Rebecca. I'll suspend the eviction until the hearing, but keep your people calm. Curtis's face darkened, veins rising along his neck. Rebecca looked him dead in the eye. 3 times you've tried. Next time you better bring more than lies. Curtis spit into the dust again. Don't think this is over. Redden motioned for his men to mount. It is for now. As they rode out, the wind slowed. Still. Silent. Even the cottonwoods held their breath. Rebecca turned to her family. We held, she said. But this ain't the end. Harrison laid a hand on her shoulder. It's a crack in his armor. And that's all we needed. Clara May peeked from behind the porch column. Is the bad man gone? Rebecca kneeled beside her. For now, sweetheart. But we stay ready. Inside the house, the lantern still burned on the kitchen table. The flame no longer flickered sideways. The house had steadied. But the war wasn't done. It was only waiting for the next knock. The roots of a thing buried deep enough will crack through stone when the rains come. The sun had barely risen above the bluffs when Rebecca sat down at the kitchen table with the ledger open in front of her. The paper had yellowed, the ink faded just enough to look fragile, but each line still burned with clarity. Abel Blackwater's original signature. Pastor Harlan's name beside it. 2 elders from the church in Silver Bluff beneath that. All of it in a tight, deliberate script that hadn't trembled even once. Thomas brought in coffee, setting the cups down gently like they were sacred. His hands shook not from fear, but from exhaustion. Days of tension had worn everyone thin, and now they stood on the hinge of something bigger than just land. We need more than this, Rebecca said, her voice low. Curtis has money and friends in Amarillo. If he throws doubt on Harlan's memory, or if that judge is in his pocket. We get more proof, Thomas said, sitting down. We make it undeniable. Rebecca nodded, the resolve in her eyes turning to something hard and weathered. Then we go to the church. We dig until we find the roots. By noon, Harrison had hitched the wagon, and Thomas drove while Rebecca rode beside him, with the ledger tucked close to her ribs. The ride to Silver Bluff stretched across 30 miles of dry land and memory. Fence posts leaned in the wind like weary watchers. The sky looked too wide and the road too empty. When they reached the outskirts of town, the little white church stood at the edge of a sloped hill, its cross leaning slightly eastward, like it was bowing to something none of them could see. The doors were open, but no one sat in the pews. The organ gathered dust. Candles burned low. Pastor Harlan was in the back room, sorting through boxes of old hymnals and communion trays. He turned when they entered, his hands pausing, mid-motion, eyes blinking through thick spectacles. Well now, he said slowly. Didn't expect to see y'all again so soon. Rebecca stepped forward. Pastor, we need you to testify to the deed. Curtis Vale is trying to wipe us off our land. He forged claims. But your name, your signature, it's the anchor in all of it. The old man reached for the ledger and opened it with care. He stared long at the page, tracing the ink with a finger. That's my hand, he said finally. And I remember the day I signed it. Cold morning. Abel had coffee with chicory in it, said it was to celebrate. Do you still have church records from then? Thomas asked. Anything official, ledgers, marriage licenses, land declarations. Harlan turned to the shelves behind him. Might be in the archives, if the moths haven't eaten through 'em. The next hours were spent hunched over boxes in the back room of the church. Dust filled their lungs and the past bled out of every crumbling paper. Baptism records, tithing envelopes, programs from funerals no one remembered anymore. Then Harrison pulled out a thin green folder. Inside was a copy of the original land dedication, the formal recognition of Blackwater Ranch as an estate under divine stewardship, dated, signed, and witnessed, and stapled to it a letter from Abel to the congregation, declaring his land to remain with his descendants, never to be sold. Rebecca stared at it like a lifeline, the roots of a thing buried deep enough. She whispered, will crack through stone when the rains come. She looked up at Harlan. Will you testify, Pastor? He nodded once. I stood beside your father when he buried that corner post. I'll stand beside his daughter now. They thanked him and rode back through twilight, the wind tugging hard at their hats, dust swirling like a dance in the road ahead. At the ranch, lanterns had already been lit. Clara May came running barefoot from the house. There's someone waitin' in the parlor, she said breathlessly. Says he knows Mama. Inside sat a man in a long coat hat in hand, his face weather-worn and calm like a still pond. When he stood, Rebecca's knees almost gave. Jameson Crow, she breathed. The last time she'd seen him, he'd been riding out of town with nothing but a guitar and a scar across his temple from a bar fight that had nearly cost him his life. Now he looked steadier, quieter. But something in his eyes still held that old restlessness. I heard about Curtis, he said, his voice like gravel under boot, and I heard you might need help. Rebecca didn't speak right away. She just stared, heart-pounding with too many memories all at once. Crow had been more than a friend, once he'd been a storm, and now he was here again. Why now, she asked, steadying her breath. Because I've seen what Curtis does to people when no one stands up, he said. And I still owe Abel Blackwater a debt. Thomas stood in the corner, arms crossed. What kind of help are you offering? Crow turned. Legal help. I've been working claims law down in Pecos. I've seen forged deeds, stacked courts, families burned out. I know the angles Curtis plays, and I know how to corner a man like him. Rebecca studied him for a long moment. You still run when things get hard? Crow shook his head. Not anymore. I plant my boots now. She nodded just once. Then we saddle up, because tomorrow we ride to Amarillo. Thomas walked over to the ledger and laid the green folder atop it. We've got paper. We've got memory. Now we've got a witness. Crow met Rebecca's eyes. Then we've got a fight. Outside, the wind stirred the porch lantern until it rocked gently on its hook. The roots had cracked the stone. Now it was time to pull them free. The courtroom ain't always where the truth is decided, but it's where you decide whether you'll stand up for it, even if no one claps when you win. The courthouse in Amarillo stood like a stone sentinel against the dusty sky, broad steps weathered from decades of footsteps. Hopeful ones, defeated ones, and somewhere in between. Rebecca stood at the bottom of those steps, her hat pulled low wind, catching the ends of her coat like it wanted to tug her backward. But she didn't flinch. Inside, the air held a strange hush, broken only by the soft clicking of shoes and the low murmur of voices. The long corridor smelled like ink, old wood, and fear. Crow walked beside her, with the slow, easy stride of someone who had worn both chains and boots of his own choosing. He held the satchel tight in one hand. Inside it, the original church ledger, Abel's letter, Harlan's notarized testimony, and the deed that Curtis Vale had tried to bury under a pile of lies. Thomas followed behind, silent, his eyes scanning the hallway like a scout before a raid. Harrison stayed back at the ranch, guarding the fence line. Clara May sat on Rebecca's bed last night, begging to come, but Rebecca told her, "This ain't a place for little girls. But I'll bring back our land with your name on it." Courtroom 3 had high ceilings and pew-like benches. A crucifix still hung crooked above the judge's bench, long forgotten. A fan clicked overhead. Curtis Vale was already seated with his lawyer, a man with a city-slicked mustache and a watch chain that gleamed like a threat. Curtis didn't look up as Rebecca walked past. He just smirked faintly, a man who believed the game was already won. Judge Haverty entered just after noon, mid-60s. Silver hair but sharp eyes. He didn't look like he was here to entertain drama. just the law or the version he believed in. Court was called to order. Curtis's lawyer went first. He spoke with lazy confidence, weaving a tale of misfiled papers, honest mistakes, how Curtis had come upon the property, thinking it had passed through probate years ago. That Abel's heirs hadn't paid taxes properly, hadn't filed anything. How Rebecca's presence was unfortunate but irrelevant. She is at best a squatter with sentiment, the man concluded. Rebecca's jaw clenched, but she didn't speak. Not yet. Then Crow stood. He didn't wear a suit, just a clean buttoned shirt and a vest. No tie. He didn't raise his voice. He just laid the truth down like lumber on a saw table. He spoke of how deeds were passed, of how churches were often the stewards of land when men trusted faith over bureaucracy. He showed the judge the green folder, the letter, the records. Then he asked Pastor Harlan to take the stand. The old man's hands shook as he swore in, but his voice held firm as a fence post once he started. I married Abel and his wife. I baptized their children. And I signed that deed because Abel wanted to tie his land to something deeper than title. He wanted it to stand like a covenant. Curtis's lawyer objected. Sentimental. Irrelevant. This isn't Sunday service. But Harlan just looked him dead in the eye. Maybe if you'd spent more Sundays in service, you'd know the weight a man's word can carry. Rebecca took the stand last. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just told the truth. About what it meant to sleep with her boots on in case someone cut the fence at night. About Clara May and the windmill, and how Abel used to stand with one hand on the porch beam when the sun set, saying nothing, just watching the land breathe. Then Crow showed the map. An old one, but Abel's handwriting was clear. A note scrawled in the margins, leave it for her. She's got the fire. Curtis laughed. Your Honor, Crow said he's laughing because he thinks this land is just numbers and ink. But the Blackwater Ranch is older than Curtis's ledger. It's held together by more than barbed wire. It's memory. It's a legacy. And it's right. Silence followed. The judge didn't blink. He stared down at the papers, then at Curtis, then at Rebecca. He didn't rule that day. Said he needed 48 hours. Outside, the wind felt different, thicker, charged. Rebecca paced the sidewalk while Thomas lit a cigarette and handed another to Crow. He's not going to rule in our favor, is he? She said low. Not without something more. He wants to, Crow muttered. But men like him, they don't stick their necks out unless they got a crowd behind them. Curtis donates to local campaigns, sponsors rodeos, pays folks debts in exchange for loyalty. Then we show him we're not alone, Thomas said. Rebecca turned. You mean, we get the people, the old ones, the ones who remember Abel, who worked under his fence crews, who were fed at that kitchen table. We pack that courtroom with every last soul who knows Blackwater wasn't stolen, it was earned. Crow nodded. We bring the whole damn legacy through the door. Make it impossible for him to forget what's at stake. Rebecca stared toward the street where cattle trucks rumbled past. If we lose, it won't be because we were quiet. The next morning they rode, all three of them, door to door, mile after mile. They spoke to farmers, ranchers, widows, and children of men long gone. Some were tired, some were bitter. But many remembered. And when they asked, will you come to Amarillo tomorrow, most just nodded and said, for Abel, for you, I'll bring my best boots. That night, as they sat on the porch beneath a red moon, Clara May curled up against Rebecca's side. Will we win? The girl asked. Rebecca stroked her hair and didn't answer right away. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods and a coyote cried far off. Then she said softly, the courtroom ain't always where the truth is decided, but it's where you decide whether you'll stand up for it. even if no one claps when you win. And with that, she held her daughter closer, her eyes locked on the horizon, where justice might just show its face if they brought enough memory to bear. Sometimes the land don't speak through lawyers or papers, it speaks through the people who bled on it, and the crowd says what the court won't. The courthouse steps groaned beneath the weight of boots and memory. By 9:30 that morning, the plaza outside the Amarillo courthouse was full of old ranchers, wearing worn denim jackets, women with prayer beads twisted around their fingers. Young men who'd heard stories of Abel at dinner tables for years. Children clutched their mothers' skirts. A man brought a battered fiddle and played the hymn Abel used to hum soft, slow, holy. Rebecca arrived in a borrowed truck, its paint sun-peeled and its engine whining like a mule. Clara May sat beside her wearing a dress stitched by one of the ranch women just the night before. A blue ribbon held her curls back. Crow met them at the doors, his eyes scanning the crowd that had grown thicker than cattle at branding time. They came, he whispered, voice gravel thick. I didn't think they would. Not this many. They remembered, Rebecca replied, holding her hat against the wind. He left something in them. Inside the building, Curtis Vale paced like a man watching the sky darken, but still refusing to believe rain would fall. His lawyer fumbled with notes, red-faced and jittery. Judge Haverty entered from chambers a few minutes past 10. This time he glanced at the rows before he sat, eyebrows arching slightly, at the sheer number of people filling every pew lining the back walls, even standing shoulder to shoulder by the doors. There were whispers, yes, but more than that, there was a weight, a presence. Court resumed. Curtis's lawyer opened his mouth to speak, but the judge raised a hand. I've reviewed all documents, heard all testimonies. This morning I see something not printed on paper. I see a legacy. He looked at Rebecca, then at the satchel still on the table before Crow, then at the people. You came here to argue about land, but what I see is inheritance, something built not just in dirt, but in memory, sweat, blood, and spirit. Curtis rolled his eyes. The judge's gaze cut sharp. Mr. Vale, you underestimated what it means to belong to a place. You tried to sever something that was never yours to take. Curtis's lawyer stood. Objection to prejudicial language, Your Honor. Overruled, the room held its breath. I rule in favor of Rebecca Dunn, Judge Haverty said plainly. The Blackwater Ranch deed is hereby reinstated to its original designation, as held in trust for the heirs of Abel Dunn, specifically his daughter, Rebecca Dunn. A gasp swept the room like wind across tall grass. Then a cheer erupted, not loud or frenzied, but deep, grateful, generations in the making. Rebecca didn't smile, not yet. She just nodded once and held Clara May's hand tighter. Curtis exploded. This is a farce. You're siding with a sob story and a crowd of hill folk instead of law. You're welcome to file an appeal, the judge said, without looking up. But I suggest you spend your money on something more meaningful, like learning the word integrity. Curtis stormed out, his boots echoing down the hallway like a tantrum in retreat. Outside, the crowd parted to let Rebecca through. Some reached to touch her arm. Some just tipped their hats. One woman whispered, Abel'd be proud. We all are. A rancher named Dalton Fry, who hadn't spoken in years since losing his wife, handed Rebecca a cracked horseshoe. He gave me this in '98, he said quietly. Said it was luck made real. Time you held it. She took it with both hands. Thank you. Reporters tried to push forward. Cameras flashed, but she ignored them. She wasn't here for headlines. Back at the ranch by evening, the sun laid down golden stripes across the fences. The cattle stirred soft in the distance, dust curling in their wake. The old oak by the barn still stood bare branches like reaching arms. Crow sat on the porch steps, sharpening his blade in rhythm. Thomas unloaded feed. Harrison arrived with a new coil of barbed wire slung over one shoulder. Rebecca stood before the porch, her hand resting on the saddle that leaned against the railing. Clara May skipped in the yard, chasing shadows. "We won," Crow said. "No," she answered, voice low. "We just got it back. That ain't the same." He looked up, curious. "I ain't looking to just sit here and keep what was handed back. I want to build, make it stronger, add rooms to the bunkhouse, bring back the riding school Abel started. Maybe something for the kids, too. Education. Books. Legacy ain't about soil, it's about what grows in it." Crow nodded slowly. "You've got the fire." She smiled faintly. So did he. That night the ranch lit up. Lanterns flickered along the porch. The long table in the yard groaned under the weight of food brought by neighbors' pie tins, roast chickens, bread wrapped in towels, bottles of homemade cider. Laughter crackled through the air. Old stories resurfaced, like river stones polished smooth by time. Rebecca sat near the fire pit. Clara May curled asleep on her lap. Thomas approached, leaning close. "You made believers out of folks who forgot how to believe." "I didn't," she said softly. "Abel did. I just reminded them." The fire sparked. Embers drifted into the sky like small prayers. Later, she walked the fence line alone, lantern in hand. The wind had picked up, whistling low, like it carried the voice of something unseen. When she reached the boundary where Curtis had first tried to cut through, where the post still bore the scar from his bolt cutters, she stopped. She drove a new post into the ground, her boots digging into the earth. She took Abel's horseshoe from her coat pocket, wrapped it in a strip of cloth, and buried it beneath the post. "Now it's done," she whispered. As she turned to walk back, lights flickered in the distance. But these weren't lanterns or firelight. They were headlights, 2 sets, coming fast down the dirt road that cut across the eastern ridge. Not local trucks, no ranch tags, no dust caked on the sides. Rebecca narrowed her eyes. Her grip on the lantern tightened. Something wasn't finished after all. A man like Curtis Vale doesn't leave quietly. He leaves something burning behind him. The headlights bore down like 2 angry eyes, slicing through the darkness, kicking up dust and suspicion in their wake. Rebecca stood frozen by the fence line, her lantern casting a trembling circle of light across the dry grass. As the first truck pulled to a halt, its engine still growling low, the second veered a sharp turn and stopped behind it, blocking the road like a barricade. She recognized the man before he even stepped out. It was Everett Vale, Curtis's youngest brother. Taller, leaner, and far more reckless. He'd been a problem 10 years ago, and time hadn't softened the sharp edges. He climbed down from the cab like a man looking for trouble, his boots crunching hard on the gravel. "Evening," Everett drawled, voice oily. "Heard there was a celebration going on. Didn't get our invitation." Rebecca didn't flinch. "If you're looking for a slice of pie, there's none left." The second door slammed. 2 more figures emerged. Not family contract hands from out-of-county rough men she didn't know, carrying themselves like they were still in someone's debt. One of them spit into the dirt. The other rolled his sleeves up to reveal a knife clipped at his belt. Everett walked up to the new post she'd just planted. He kicked it once. Hard. It didn't budge. "Curtis ain't too happy, you know," he muttered. "Thinks you got lucky in court. Thinks maybe you need reminding that land disputes don't always end with gavels." "This ain't a court," Rebecca said, her voice steady, though her chest beat like a drum. "But you come here looking to tear something down, you better be ready for what rises up in its place." He snorted. "Still got that mouth on you. I got more than that." Lantern light flickered behind her. Crow had come down from the porch. No sound, no announcement. Just his shadow moving like smoke through the field rifle slung low boots, deliberate. Behind him, Harrison and Thomas stepped from the bunkhouse, each carrying fence tools, but not the kind for mending. Everett turned. "Ah, the rescue squad." Crow said nothing, just stood there, watching. "This land's under my name now," Rebecca said. "And trespassing at night with threats and hired hands, that's more than a civil matter." Everett smiled without mirth. "Ain't done anything. Yet." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "But you came to." He walked closer, too close. The reek of whiskey clung to him like sweat. "You don't belong here. You think Abel bought respect, he paid people to care. The second he died, that spell broke. These folks," he waved toward the house and the hills, "they'll leave you. The second something goes wrong. You're just a mail-order bride with a story." She stared him down, not blinking. "And you're just a coward hiding in your brother's shadow." The words hit. He stepped back, face twisting. Crow's voice cracked the air like dry timber splitting. "You best leave now." Everett looked at him, then at the others behind. For a second he calculated. But even fools know when numbers are stacked against them. "Curtis'll send someone else," he said finally. "You think it's done, but a man like him, he don't take no for an answer." Then he can hear it again. Rebecca answered louder this time. Everett held her gaze a moment longer, then turned to the men by the truck. "Let's go." They climbed in. The engines roared back to life, and both vehicles peeled off into the night. Red tail lights vanishing into the ridgeline like angry eyes retreating into the dark. When silence returned, it was heavier than before. Rebecca's breath came slow. Crow came to stand beside her. "You all right? I will be," she said. "But I think he's right about one thing." Crow raised a brow. "He didn't come here just to scare me. This was a test. They're going to try something bigger." He looked back toward the house where Clara May's shadow could be seen in the upstairs window. "We'll be ready." Rebecca looked at the post again. The horseshoe was buried deep, but it felt like something sacred had just been spit on. The next morning came with no peace. The corral was slashed open, barbed wire scattered like spilled nails, 3 calves missing. Tracks in the dirt showed boot prints dragging hooves, tire marks leading east toward the state road. Crow knelt beside the fence, running his fingers over a broken post. They came during the music, while everyone was around the fire. Rebecca clenched her fists. They used the headlights as a distraction. Thomas held up a brand iron, its handle scorched black. This was tossed in the feed barn. They didn't just want to steal, they wanted to send a message. Clara May came out to the porch holding a small bundle. "Mama, someone left this by the door." Rebecca took it. Wrapped in burlap bound with wire was a single photograph. A picture of Abel in the old days surrounded by cattle holding a newborn calf. Scrawled across it in red ink were the words, "This land don't forget." "Neither do we." Crow's jaw tightened. "They're trying to rattle you, force you into fear. If they can't take the land, they'll try to burn it from your heart." Rebecca stared at the photo, her father's smile, his weather-beaten hands. She traced the edges, then folded it back into the burlap. "No," she said. "We won't let that happen." She looked at the barn, the fields, the horizon. "It's time we stop defending and start rebuilding louder, brighter, bigger than they ever expected." Crow nodded slowly. "You want to call the sheriff, I will. But that's not the only call I'm making." Later that afternoon, Rebecca stood in the post office with a letter in hand. Not to the sheriff, to the State Land Commission, to the local paper, to the Agriculture Council. Inside was a proposal, Abel's old dream made whole again, the return of Blackwater as a sanctuary ranch for families displaced by land grabs, for orphans needing work, and home for broken horses and broken people alike. A ranch not just restored, but resurrected. As she sealed the envelope, the clerk looked up from behind the desk. "You sending good news?" Rebecca smiled, faint but firm. "I'm sending a warning dressed as a blessing." "You want to break a woman like Rebecca Vale? You'd better bring more than fire and wire. She'll rebuild it stronger every time." The sun crested over the hills like a gold coin dropped from heaven, spilling light across the battered corral. Rebecca stood at the center of it, surveying the damage from the night before. Busted rails, a broken gate, empty feed troughs. Where 3 calves once bawled in the early dawn, only silence remained. Crow had barely slept. He'd been walking the perimeter since 4 a.m. Eyes sharp, hands steady. Clara May brought him coffee in a chipped mug, standing beside her mother now as he returned. They left a second message, he said, holding out a bent nail twisted into the shape of a noose. Rebecca didn't blink. She just took it, turned it over once, then dropped it into the fire barrel nearby. "I've sent the letter," she said. "If they want war, they can face it in broad daylight." Crow nodded. "You think they'll come again?" She looked east, where dust still lingered faintly on the rise like the shadow of a retreating ghost. "Not yet. Curtis is smart. He'll wait and let fear rot the roots before he pulls anything else. But this place isn't built on fear." Thomas and Harrison came up the path, dragging lumber behind them from the old shed. "We've got enough to patch the pen. We'll reinforce it before dusk," Thomas said. "But Rebecca—" She turned toward him, already reading the worry behind his weather-worn face. "There's talk," Harrison said quietly. "Down at the co-op. Word is Curtis's boys offer double wages for any man who'll walk off Blackwater and take up contract work on his new land clear across Dry Basin. They're poaching Crow's jaw set." "No," Rebecca said calmly. "They're baiting." She turned back toward the barn where the rising sun gilded the beams like they were painted in gold. "Then it's time we show them why good men don't leave here." That afternoon she called a meeting. Every man and woman who'd ever worked under Abel's name, every rider, every wrangler, every stable hand, still loyal, gathered beneath the big oak at the south pasture. Clara May sat on Crow's shoulders, holding the ranch's old branding flag in one hand, its weathered emblem fluttering like a heartbeat. Rebecca stood on the flatbed wagon and looked out over the people. "I won't give you speeches," she began. "You've seen what they've done. Broken fences, burned supplies, poisoned talk in town. Curtis Vale thinks that fear is stronger than memory." She let the words settle, let silence stretch. "But we're still standing." Her voice rose like wind catching dry grass. "This ranch was never just Abel's dream. It's ours now. It belongs to every calf brought into the world, every mile ridden in snow or sun, every nail driven through frozen boards. They think they can erase that with threats and paychecks. I say we show them who built this land." A murmur ran through the crowd. Heads nodded, hands clenched. She stepped down. "We rebuild today. Not just the fence, but everything." By noon, the hammering began. They mended the corral rails with thicker posts and twisted wire. They laid fresh feed along the troughs and reinforced the east pasture gate. Crow and Thomas rehung the barn doors, while Harrison climbed the silo ladder and raised a fresh weather vane shaped like a longhorn forged from scrap Curtis had tossed at them like trash. Rebecca turned the bunkhouse into a planning room, laying out Abel's old blueprints across the table. Clara May colored next to her, sketching the horses she wanted one day, her crayon lines running alongside inked property borders. "We need a water line to the south. Crow said, leaning over the plans. And fencing that can hold wild mustangs, Rebecca added. If this is going to be a refuge for strays, animal or human, it needs to hold fast through storms. Thomas pointed at a small clearing. That could be a schoolhouse, for the children of workers. Abel always said education was the second saddle a man needed. She looked up, tears brimming, but held back. Let's build it. By sunset, the place thrummed with noise, honest noise. Sawing, nails clinking, horses stomping in fresh straw, the laughter of tired men proud of their calluses. Crow leaned against the paddock fence, watching Rebecca move from station to station, checking every post, patting shoulders, tying gloves tighter on younger hands. The sun caught the edge of her braid and turned it the color of rusted copper. You think they'll see this? He asked. She didn't turn. They'll hear it, in every gate that slams shut without fear, in every voice that says no to their coin, in the sound of boots choosing this dirt over theirs. Clara May ran up, her arms full of flowers. Mama, can we plant these in front of the bunkhouse? Miss Maybelle says they keep snakes away. Rebecca nodded, kneeling beside her daughter. Go ahead, give them roots. Crow watched her a long moment. You know I've seen strong women before, he said. But what you're doing, this ain't just survival. It's resurrection. She looked up at him. They buried me in Abel's grave the day he died. They just didn't check if I was still breathing. He didn't smile. He just nodded. As dusk settled, the men lit lanterns along the path, their warm glow winding like fireflies around the property. The ranch had changed shape. New lumber gleamed under the setting sky. What was torn had been replaced. What was burned had been reborn. But Rebecca stood still, eyes fixed toward the north. What is it? Crow asked. She raised a finger. A single dot moved across the ridge. Not a truck, no engine noise. A rider, coming slow, deliberate. Rebecca stepped forward. He sent someone. Crow reached for his rifle. No, she said. Let them come. I want them to see what's been built with the very ashes they left behind. The figure approached, slow hooves thudding like a drumbeat. No haste, no fear. As the rider neared the edge of the lantern light, the horse came to a stop. The man tipped his hat. You, Rebecca Vale. She squared her shoulders. I am. The rider reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, crisp and wax-sealed. Name's Clay Billings. I ride for Mr. Curtis Vale. He said to hand this to you direct. She took it, tore the seal, and read silently. Her face didn't change. What does it say? Crow asked. Rebecca handed it to him. A single line in bold script, you can build all you want. I'll burn it again, and this time I'll bury you with it. Rebecca looked past the rider up at the moon hanging clean above the barn. Tell Mr. Vale, she said calmly, he'd best bring a shovel big enough for his own grave too. The rider paused, nodded once, and turned his horse. As he vanished into the darkness, Rebecca turned to Crow. We're not just holding ground anymore, she whispered. We're preparing for siege. Crow placed the letter into the flames beside the nail from earlier. It curled, blackened, and disappeared. Rebecca watched it burn. There are lines in the dirt now, she said. He'll cross them soon. And when he does, I won't be waiting with a fence. She turned toward the house, her daughter, and the lights of a ranch reborn, one nail, one voice, one vow at a time. The educational lesson learned from this story is that family is not defined by blood alone, but by those who stand with us when it matters most. Even in moments of deep betrayal and heartbreak, there is room for healing, dignity, and a future rebuilt on truth. Sometimes the quiet strength we show in the face of injustice becomes the foundation of our greatest legacy. For those in their later years, It's a reminder that it's never too late to protect what's yours, draw clear boundaries, and choose peace over chaos.